This week on the podcast, my guest is Ian Wills, frontman of Wills and the Willing. As a young boy, Ian's life looked to be turning into a life of crime. He was addicted to heroin by age 13, tried to kill himself by age 15, and then he was able to turn his life around. He was at war with the government over selling a book that was banned in Britain. And then after that, he started releasing music. He's released 4 studio albums, with his 5th, Another Long Week, due out on the 5th of July, which includes a co-write with Bruce Springsteen, who is just one of many name drops that we'll hear in this episode. Ahead of the album release, Wills and the Willing will be playing London St Pancras Old Church on the 19th of June and Isle Of Wight Festival on the 22nd of June. Ian has led a tremendous life. He faces ongoing battles with his health but remains upbeat. He's a true inspiration for everyone. I hope you enjoy the podcast. If you do, please keep liking, sharing, commenting and subscribing. Tell your pals, but more importantly, enjoy.
Another helpless story ends today. It's all I ever dreamed of, to wipe the fear away.
On the podcast today, I have Ian Wills. He is the frontman of Wills and the Willing. If you've never heard of them, check them out. But we're going to talk about all the Wills and the Willing's career and Ian's career before that. Wills and the Willing have got a new album coming out, and they play London St Pancras Church, I think it is, and then Isle Of Wight Festival in June also. So we're going to touch on all that. But as I said, Ian, I like to go back to the start with my guests, where you grew up, how your early life was, and how it kind of started your journey.
Yeah, well, hi Martin, how you doing? So I grew up in South London. I was sort of born in St Helier Hospital on the St Helier estate, which is a particularly grime part of South London. And then we moved from there to Finsbury Park, which was a particularly grime part of North London. And then when the rat-infested holes that we were living in were knocked down, they had started to build what's known as the Roundshaw estate on the old Croydon Airport. Mm-hmm. And so from there we moved on to Roundshaw in '69, and the sort of promise of new beginnings. When I look back on that part of my life, especially sort of some aspects of it, it was joyful. We were running around all hours of the day. There was this whole new concrete jungle that was being built, mm-hmm. and you made some friendships and you made your friends. And but one thing I realised as when we was living there was that now when I look back at how poor we were. Because we used to think anybody who had carpet in their house was a millionaire.
Right.
And so you don't realise a certain level of things until sort of you get a little bit older and a bit wiser. And then from there, we moved from often my father was sort of a particular individual that couldn't keep his hands off me. And my mother's younger brother had immigrated to New Zealand. So in the July of '74, we went to New Zealand with the basis of a fresh life, and we were back here in April '75. And then we went to live in the back of Sorrento Road in a place called Sutton, which was my nan's house, which even then you didn't have no hot water. The only heat was from the coal. And then she had enough of us, and then we ended up in a halfway house in Wallington, which was 4 of us living in one room. And the only clothes that we had was a school uniform. And then from there, we ended up living in Mitcham, in another slum in Mitcham.
Oh, to see all these places you mentioned, I'm familiar with all these places. My wife's from Crawley. When I met her, she was staying in Wallington when I met her, about 17, 18 years ago now. And she was staying in Wallington. She worked at Mitchin Golf Club.
Well, so Mitchell Golf Club I burgled several times, but not
Aye, so she worked there, and I've been a few nights out in Sutton. So I'm familiar with all these places.
So, well, then if you know the Mitcham Golf Club, well, if you come out the golf club and turn left and walk back towards Hackbridge, there's that huge, disgusting council estate on the right-hand side. That's where we live in. So it gives, it was, so I'm not exaggerating the context to which poverty we found ourselves living in.
Yeah.
And if you know the area, then you'll know exactly where I'm talking about.
Yeah. I mean,
that.
There's places like that up and down the country, these estates, and as you kind of mentioned as well, obviously you do kind of forge friendships, and kind of, I think it's because everybody's kind of in the same boat, or as you say, you think you're in the same boat, and that's kind of to a certain extent where your longest friendships are formed. I believe anyway.
So some friendships are sort of. So I had a friend of mine. He worked. I had a gardening business, and I went into labouring, doing the office petitioning. And for a period of time, we worked together, and then our paths separated. Mine went in one direction, he went in others. And about 18 months, well, it was 2 years ago now, he reconnected with me. We hadn't seen each other for a long, long time. And we went and I went and had dinner with him, or lunch in Sutton at the top of Sutton High Street. And I was shocked, he's 6 months younger than I am. And I was shocked at how sick he was at that point. And he died about 7 weeks later. And my wife, I told a particular story, if we can go into this story. I always told this story of the younger me. And particularly at that point in my life, I was doing quite well. And I said to Andrew at the time, there was a friend of mine, Scott, in my van, and Andrew was in the van behind me and was going up to town. I said to Scott, I'm so good looking. There ain't a woman that can't resist me. And in front of us at London Bridge, there was this beautiful girl. She was in a Porsche Targa, blonde. She had everything. I said, I bet you before those lights turn green, I can get her name and telephone number and her address. And Scott said, there's no way. I went, you sure? He went, where we made this bet. The first thing I did was put it into first gear and drive it straight in the back of her car. So what's the first thing she has to do? She has to give me a name, telephone number, and her address. So I told this story. I've told this story for lots of times. And so I meet Andrew, and the first thing he goes to do is tell the story. I said, no, stop, Andrew, don't say a word. I got my wife on the phone and on FaceTime. I said, now tell the story. And he told it verbatim. And when I was supporting the Stranglers as the poet, he had the greatest pride to. We toured the UK. I was the poet, opened up for them, and we did a couple of shows in the Channel Islands. And the joy that he got being at the front of the stage, seeing me come on stage as this poet, and he's laying in his bed now. He's got pancreatic cancer. He's probably got no more than 24 hours left to live, and he's laying on the bed. He closes his eyes, puts his arms stretched out behind him, and all this is going, Ian Wills, Ian Wills, Ian Wills. So you make those friendships, and sometimes they stay with you all your life, and the distance comes because your life's going a different direction, but something pulls you back sometimes.
Yeah.
And that is an example of that.
It's a beautiful story. That's really nice, man. And it's nice that you were able to reconnect with him and get maybe the last few years.
Well, we he ended up in. We had some adventures together, and there was I managed to get these Howard Johnson vouchers, which was a hotel in. I said, should we go? Do you want to go to LA? Should we go to LA? And I had no idea whether these vouchers were going to work or not. And in those days, so we never stayed. We stayed one night, only one night. We went to Vegas. We did everything. And I sort of got to know Jermaine Jackson in that period. And Andrew recounts the period about how off of our nuts we were. So that was our first adventure. So the second adventure was, I said to him, do you fancy? I had a few quid and he had a few quid. I said, what should we do? Should we go to Monaco for the weekend? Let's go give it large. Yeah, let's have a bit of that. If we go to Monaco, I tell you now, man, I had to borrow the money to get the flight back. We lost everything, right? so now time goes on a little bit, and I was doing well with the gardening and everything else. I said, I've got an idea. Whatever is the last flight out of Gatwick tonight, should we get on it? And Andrew's going like, he said, well, man, I ain't got the money. I went, no, I'll pay for it, right? I'll pay for it. Oh, everything's on me. I went, yeah, come on, let's go. So we get home, get down to Gatwick. Now, he's looking at the board. He can see Sydney. He can see Los Angeles. He can see everything. But the deal was, whatever was the very last flight out of Gatwick, I was going. So we go up to the desk and we go to the very last Gat flight. Well, actually, this is where we ended up in Guernsey, because the Urungi air flight had been delayed and there was still seats on it. So it was the very last flight out. So he had this vision up with going, so we ended up in Guernsey. And before, we stayed there for like 4 or 5 days initially, and we get to know people, and he loved it. He was in his element. And so he spent like 2 years living there. And at the time of his life, but at his funeral, none of his family could understand how he ended up in Guernsey, because his part of his life nobody understood. So so I tell the story. They asked me if I could tell the story, and actually on another long week, one of the tracks was called "Through Your Eyes." I'd written that with my. I was meant to do I think it was BBC London, and I was driving up from the West Coast down West Sussex. And the A3, the snow was so bad, I had no option but to turn around. And by the time I turned around, I was now finding myself driving in this most horrendous conditions. And so I thought to myself, all I wanted to do was get home. And when I made it home, all I kept thinking was my youngest daughter. I wanted to see her. I realized it really was treacherous condition. So I got home, cup of tea, I picked up the guitar, and I wrote "Through Your Eyes." But I'd never found the third verse. And then when Andrew passed, the third verse came to me within an hour of his passing. And so I put it onto the album. And so friendships sometimes. And he sent me many texts in that last bit of his life, and on the album, if anybody does get the CD version of it, in the booklet, I put when I dedicate the booklet, the album, dedicate to Bill Kenwright, who was a good friend of mine, and to Andrew, and I put Bill's last text to me, and Andrew's last text to me. I put some of the words into it, and it's a glorious thing to see that those friendships are not forgotten.
Yeah, beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So back to kind of this housing estate then. So I don't want to miss out anything. So kind of there's a lot to kind of touch on in your early years. So how far are you able to delve into kind of?
Well, I think it's been anybody who your listeners will Google me or whatever. I by the time when we came back from New Zealand, my father was his joy was to sort of batter me within an inch of my life. So at 13 years old, I took a knife to him, and I did tell him very clearly, if you touch me one more time, I'm going to cut your eye out. And at that point, I'd gone, if that makes sense. My sense of values, the sense of everything. Mm-hmm. We were in abject poverty. So I started stealing cars and one thing and another. And initially, the motivation was just so that we had money. And then, like everything else, I sort of became quite good at it. And I found myself stealing cars, doing various sort of, you mentioned Mission Rugby Club. I broke into Mission Rugby Club several times. I broke into Carshalton Athletic a few times, and I was a one-man crime wave. Mm-hmm. And obviously I got involved in hard drugs and found myself jacking up and what have you. And there came this point where I detailed it in my book, where that I was a good person doing bad things, and I could have become a bad person doing really bad things. And so when that tipping point was reached, I I thought about ending my life. I jacked up, and I actually meticulously got it right, except for I didn't count on this man and his wife walking their dog. And they found me at if you know the Mill Green, at the back of there's a sort of the Wandle, or there's a sort of derelict path which nobody normally goes down. And that was where I was meant to end my life. I sort of came out of hospital. At this point now, I'd been charged with stealing a huge amount of cars, and it was my lot. So when I was 13, they banned me from driving when I was 16. When I was 14, they banned me from driving when I was 17. And when I was 15, they banned me to driving when I was 21 and a half.
Right.
I also got, I was sentenced to 6 years, which would have meant Borstal and then prison. But for some reason, which I never quite understood, my probation officer, I was on probation since I was 13. I've been refused legal aid now, but the solicitor that represented me did it because he saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, and they convinced the court to give me a chance. And after a lot of lobbying and whatever, I had to. The condition was in the March of '78. I was 15 and 8 months old. I had to get a job. I was curfewed, and if I was allowed to leave the house from 5 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. And I got a job at Dewhurst, the butchers. And when I went for that interview, I went with my probation officer, a psychiatrist, and a police officer.
Right.
And the guy that gave me the job, his name was Mr. Cummings, and he sat there and listened to everything. He was a real gruff Yorkshireman. And I obviously provided some information about myself that I don't realize now. Until even now, I must have said something that gave him, he could see something in me. But he had his finger on his left hand was missing. And during the interview, all I kept doing was looking at his hand, one where his finger's gone. So in a sort of real Yorkshire accent, he said, "Son, why are you looking at my hand? Are you wondering where my finger is?" I said, "Yeah, I am." And he said, "Well, I lost it not paying attention." He said, "So that's the first lesson you're going to learn today. Now, are you paying attention?" And then he asked me a question. He said, "Are you going to let me down? Are you going to steal from us? Are you going to turn up for this job?" And I answered that, I said I genuinely wanted this opportunity. And I was really strict at that time. My salary was £12 a week. My mother took £9 a week off me, left me £3. And she did it on the basis I realized trying to push me. My mother had lots of things wrong with her mentally as well. And I realized it was her way trying to push me to breach the conditions.
Right.
And so I had to report 3 times a week. And the time, so if you know that part, so the first Jewess was at the Circle in St Helier Estate, obviously in the Cellier Arms, and we was living in Mill Green. So I used to walk up that road. If you walk up the road to the top to the Circle there, which is about 2 miles, I had to walk to work, walk back home, and I eventually, just before my 17th birthday, because if it went after my 17th birthday, it would have been a criminal record rather than a juvenile record. And it was about, I think it was June the 28th, June the 29th, something like that. We went back and had my case was reviewed. I'd been reviewed every quarterly. And the magistrates were very kind and felt that I had kept my word to that point. But, but it was very clear that if I got sentenced to any criminal offence, that the 6 years would be reimposed.
Right.
But I was free. I had nothing over him. I had no record, and that was one of the sort of more joyful times of my younger life. And the sense of the weight on the shoulders of not having to go to the old bill station 3 times a week. The first thing I did, I moved out. I moved. I immediately. I initially lived in a flat in Wallington, and then when I was 18 and a half, I bought my first house in Wallington.
Right.
And so you go from there, and I still had a few scraps in my life, and I had a particular reputation where, like all these things, I was never a bully, like but
Yeah.
I was a handful, and I at that point there came a point where I got battered around. If you know Cushall High Street, it was a supermarket they called Fine Fair. It took nothing, but they gave me a kicking that I still got the scars of today. And it was like the last time. It was like a sign off, if you like, of the old me in terms of the historics of my life. And I got my license, but while I was working as a butcher, I'd left Dewhurst. I worked in another shop for 3 years. But in the interim of that, one day this old lady came in the shop. She was a lovely old lady, and she it was in Cushall and Beaches, and she said to me, "Oh, I've been worried sick of my garden. It's all overgrown, my neighbours." And I said, "Well, look, why don't I come over?" We used to close the shop at 3 o'clock on a Saturday. So why don't I come over at 3 o'clock Saturday and see if I can do it? So I went over there. It was like a jungle. So I was there all day Saturday, all day Sunday. My half days was Mondays and Wednesdays. Monday afternoon, Wednesday afternoon. I did it all for her. She gave me a fiver. My hands were blistered. It was like I cut down the half of the Sahara. But it made me think about it. That, well, this is a really, it's a good residential area. I got 1,000 leaflets printed up, and during my lunchtime and that, I walked up and down Banstead Road South, all around those roads there, putting the leaflet through the letterbox. And then, but as soon as I was able to drive, so I did gardening over the weekends and whatever. So effectively, I was working 7 days a week. And then I got my license back, and then I took my test a week after I got my license, and I passed. And that was the last time I was working as a butcher. Now I've started my gardening business. And then I did my market stalls. I did butchering in the markets, and as I say, and then I started doing the labouring business.
Right. So along with us market stalls, so what I've got here is a book, Spycatcher.
Spycatcher. So sort of now we got the sort of, so I sort of got the entrepreneurial flair in my head. At that point, it was just before my 25th birthday when I came up with the idea, and I really so Spycatcher was banned, and to me, I said this the other day. It was Never Mind the Bollocks. It was God Save the Queen, right? It was the Sex Pistols. It was banned. So something told me, especially at that point in our history, if something was banned, it would go to number one. So I thought to myself, if the book's banned and I can get it, I can sell it at a profit. And that's what I did. I did my research. I managed to get my hands on some books. I had an Uncle Sam outfit. Initially, I flew to America and bought the books. I bought them back in here, and I dressed up as Uncle Sam, and then I spent the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday going around London selling them on the hard shoulder of the motorways. And on the Friday, I sold them outside the House of Parliament. And an MP at that time took the book into the House of Parliament, and Margaret Thatcher, she was worried that if they said something in Parliament could be reported, but she got the embargo that they couldn't say anything. And then on the Monday, I was outside Harrods, and I got arrested. Unfortunately, the guys who were working with my gardening business, we gave up gardening for a few days, and they were my lookouts. And it was a glorious sunny day, and you get looking at all the girls going by, and rather than keeping their eyes out for the white van that pulled up next to me, and all these old Bill jumped out, plain white, grabbed me, and picked up the bag, chucked me in the back of the van, and I said to them, "Oh, is this going to take long?" They said, "No, you'll be out in a couple of hours." And then we had complaint from management Harrods about there's this big crowd outside their door and everything else. So I went to Walton Police Station, and then I knew two things. When they put my name in the system, there's no point trying to be a clever sod. But I knew what I was doing was not criminal. It was civil, and I'm sure of that. I'd done my research at that. But anyway, they held me overnight and bowed me on the Tuesday. So you can imagine leaving London. At that time, I was living in South Croydon. I had to get home dressed as Uncle Sam at 7 o'clock in the rush hour. And I bought the Times. And on page 2 of the Times, a very little section, it said Ian Clive Wills, aged 24, was yesterday arrested selling copies of the banned book Spycatcher. So I thought, well, nobody I know reads the Times except me. And they bowed me. I was bowed, and I had to appear in Horseferry Road Magistrates 10 days later. But when they bowed me, they said we was going to rearrest you and charge you with a lot more serious offences. And I was like, I don't think so. They raided my house looking for the books. Obviously, I wasn't stupid enough to leave any there. And then so I'm very punctilious, and I went to, I had to be there at 10 o'clock Wednesday morning. And I took the train to Victoria, and I was there at 9 o'clock. So I went and had a cup of tea. And as I came out walking down the Horseferry Road, there was this mass scrum of media, TV, press, and everything. And the first thing that came to my head was, wow, somebody famous must have got nicked last night. I hope I can get their autograph. But it turned out, of course, that there was only reason that they was all there, and that was for me. And there wasn't a newspaper then in the world that didn't have a picture of me on it, and didn't. The story became a bit of a legacy to my life, actually. And just recently, my phone caught a lie again because the 35-year rule come up, and so some of the stuff that Thatcher had done was, in terms of suppressing Peter Wright, the book, and everything else, was now made into the public domain. And so everybody calling me, so it never leaves me. And actually, and because of that, it's what actually led me to my creative path.
Yeah. It's obviously a certain part of the brain that kind of makes you think like that, because no everybody's got that kind of entrepreneurial kind of aspect to themselves. So it is certainly a kind of creative side to you.
Yeah, and what happened was that so when I was a kid, I remembered writing poetry. And when I during the period of my gardening business, I started writing again. And so by the time I did Spycatcher, I'd probably been 2 years writing. And I was asked if I'd do an interview. And I said yes, for TV. And I said yes, but you got to let me perform one of my poems. And they said no. I said, well, I'm not going to do it then. So eventually they compromised, and they phoned me up and said, look, Ian, if you write something about Spycatcher, will you come on and as Ian Wills dressed as Uncle Sam? I said, yeah, I'll live with that. And so I did it, and then I obviously caught their attention. And then United Artists, which was the infancy now of what we know as Sky, they were cable TV was very much coming through the sort of ground at that point. And so the London show of it, I got my own slot on Friday. So on a Friday, I'd write something, I'd perform a poem saying that I've written, or something I've written that's happened, and whatever. And one of the guests on the program was David Jensen, Kid Jensen.
Mm-hmm.
And David was blown away by me. He said, I've got to introduce you to my friend. And so I didn't hear from David for a couple of weeks. And in my book, the guy who came, who's a friend of mine as well now, details it in the fact that I turned up at Selhurst Park in my Dr. Martens because David Jensen was a mad Crystal Palace fan. And I said, your mate ain't contacted me yet, mate. And I went to the director's box and came out to see me. But it turned out that my friend is an Arsenal fan, and he was there with David watching Palace Arsenal. So he came out, and his name was CJ. And so CJ said to me, listen, son, why don't you come to my office on Tuesday down on the Fulham Road? So I went down to his office on the Tuesday afternoon, and we had a chat, and I performed some of my poetry. He said, this is really good. This is so different. And CJ had managed Status Quo for 20 odd years. And the band that he was now at that point was managing was the Stranglers. And so I convinced him to let me be the support for the Stranglers as a poet.
Right.
And none of that would have happened but for Spycatcher.
That's mental.
I know. So I've always been extremely grateful. One, it always makes people like yourself, you're intrigued by the story. And secondly, when you actually tell the whole DNA of that story, and yet, you know, the sort of Del Boy Arthur Daly young that I was, it afforded me the platform to show that here's a boy who really left school when he was 13 years old, that I could do something creative.
Yeah, that's truly amazing. It's all about taking your chance, and then you think all those years later where that chance has led you. Yeah, it's mental.
It is, and so, you know, and Andrew, come back to Andrew. He was so blown over. You know, I think he bought that day. I think he bought 50 copies of the Evening Standard and gave it to everybody that he knew. That's my friend Ian. Yeah, Ian's the. You know, so you know, we're all heroes to somebody. We just don't realize it sometimes.
Mm.
And so the for me, David Jensen was a hero. And years later, David, when I did Curbside, my first album, David by now was on Capital Gold, and he had been looking for a reason to have me as a guest on his station. But as a poet, you know, none of what I was doing fitted at that time. So now, on, you know, sort of like 15 years later, when I made my first album, now there was a reason to have me on his show. And it was such an honor. And I was so privileged to sit in the Capitol studio and sit opposite David and talk about, like we're talking now, but obviously we're talking about the album, and at that time I'd won Pick of the Fringe in Edinburgh, and so it was a real, you know, Spycatcher I owe everything to.
Mm. What about the poetry then? What was the poetry inspired by? What were you writing about, like your early life? And who was your kind of inspirations? Like, was there any other poets that you kind of looked up to or anything?
No, you know, this was the thing. It was like my school report at Roundshaw Juniors. I found it, and it said I was a huge disruptive influence. I was a very unhappy child, but I was good at poetry and needlework. And if I couldn't find a platform, I was doomed for failure. So I got up one morning, and I was in the shower and had this line in my head. And I was doing my gardening, and I was thinking about when I was living on the streets, and I was thinking about living in the garages in Roundshaw. And I woke up with this line, and it says, I ain't got no house or money, but I'm doing all right. You see, I've got this cardboard box where I spend the night. Those two lines stayed in my head. We went to the job of the gardening, and I said to Graham, who was working for me, I said, you know what, I don't feel so well. You go to the job, get out. I've got out at the bottom of South Croydon with traffic lights. And I went over to Smith's and I bought a book, bought a pen, and I sat in the park, and I wrote this poem called It Could Happen to You. And it literally came, the original is in a box, and I can show you. There was probably one word I changed in that poem. Mm. So I thought, wow, this is interesting. And so I went back to Smith's and I bought the stage. And I was thinking, how can I perform? So there was this thing at the back, it said novelty acts wanted, seaside resorts. So I found out this guy, his name was David Lever. And I asked if I could come and do something. He said, well, what do you do? I said, I'm a poet. He said, well, I don't really do poets. I said, well, I'll give you 20 quid. I think it was 20, 25 quid. I'll pay you. Let me. So I get down the next day in Bournemouth, and it was the, you know, Blue Rinse Brigade, right? Sort of like old age, all that sort of, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a poet from London, Ian Wills. I walk on, and now this poem is like 3 days old. And it's in my head, it's ingrained in my head. And I performed it. And at the end of it, it stopped, there's absolute silence. And all of a sudden, there was just this most amazing applause. And I left. And he said, wow, that's great. He said, well, why don't you go and do something else? I went, no, I just needed to try out this one. Like I did I'd written. And then as I started writing, and at that time I was, you know, writing about the society, you know, the times that we're living in. one of my musical, the music that I was really attracted to, always is very diverse. So I always say, from Barry Manilow to the Pistols to Phil Oakes, but the sort of real gene in my life was and still is, was Springsteen. But the inspirational people I at this point discovered was Woody Guthrie, J.D. Salinger. I love Catcher in the Rye. I must have written Woody biography he wrote when he was 29 years old, Bound for Glory. I must have read that 6 or 7 times at that point. So there was that sort of ethos of the spiritual, the incredibility of lyrics. I couldn't play an instrument, and then Sky had this thing called Sky Star Search. So I thought, right, I'm going to go for that. And I've got on VHS, I have me performing It Could Happen to You. And the judges, one of the judges was Derek Nimmo, and a great wordsmith, an incredibly intelligent actor, thespian, and he was blown away by It Couldn't Happen to You. And then a year later, I think it was 87, it must be 86, 87, 88, National Sleep Out had started.
Mm-hmm.
And I performed It Could Happen to You for that. And I slept outside the night. One of the people that slept out with me that night was Billy Bragg. And he said to me, he said, mate, he said, you need to learn to sing it. Find the power of a guitar. And I love Billy Bragg, that, and his early stuff was always, like, for me, was again inspirational. And then one thing led to another. And then a girl called Tina, who's been my friend and for a long time, she was managing MC Kinky, and they were doing and Boy George, and they were doing. She was involved in the production of the very first World AIDS concert at the Brixton Academy on December 1st. Now, one of the other things that I've written, if anybody listens to this, there's two forms of it on YouTube. There's me performing it as a poet. I originally wrote it, and there's a song, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But I went and saw Tina. I said, I've got this thing I think is perfect for the Serenade concert. She said, what's that? It's called HIV. Now, I'd written it in the mid-'80s, and I performed it. She sat there and wiped the tears from her eyes, and she said to me, you're on. She said, do you want to do the Friday night and Saturday night? And that Friday night, the bands that were doing it were James, Misha Paris, Everything But the Girl, Stereo MCs. So I was the poet in between each act.
Mm-hmm.
And on a Saturday, I did it with George. And George at that time had his own show on the Power Station, which was on VH1. And I regularly appeared with George as a poet on his show. And then George let me, when he was doing the Jesus Loves You, he let me support him as a poet on that. So in a way, I look back at that period of time, and I realized that I was probably pioneering spoken word more than anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I've had 2 or 3 spoken word artists on the podcast, and kind of, as far as I was led to believe, it's a pretty northern thing. Like, I've had a guy for Dundee, a guy for 2 guys for Yorkshire, and obviously one of the most famous ones is John Cooper Clarke, obviously a northern guy as well. So I've never really heard much spoken word from a southern kind of accent.
Well, the thing was, it's all I knew how to do. So a few years, I stopped. I gave up the arts for a period of time, and went into business and everything else. And then I got really ill in 2004. I got septic arthritis. I nearly lost my life, and I came out of hospital in the October of 2004. I thought, right, I need to take a year off. And I thought, I'm going to go back to writing. I'm going to go back to being creative. And back in the 90s, I helped CJ, now became a friend. I helped fund the band that made friendships. And one of the guys in the band became a very good friend of mine. And I said to him, I want to do something with my words. I want to do something with my poetry. And so he found out Jason Knight, who had been in the band Radar, which I funded, and Jason had played in Reef, and Martin was the drummer in Radar. They got together, and then he got Jesse. Martin knew Jesse, and Jason knew Brendan. And then so in the November of 2004, we get to Jesse's garage in Somerset, and we started jamming. And during that period of time, we started jamming, and we formed and worked as a band, and we recorded Curbside. But I wanted to learn my art of being a frontman at this point. So I thought, how can I do it? And I thought, right, we're going to go to Edinburgh. And I applied to do the Fringe. At that point, we only had 7 songs. But it's enough because we had to do 30 minutes. And the way that we then came up, the idea was, as we recorded different stories for the songs, and then we put them on a projector behind us.
Right.
And so then there was the songs were like Bogus Official, but sort of like Salesman of the Year, who obviously gets in his Porsche and kills these kids and driving stupidly, and so the subject matter was always very, very hardcore. And we finished after Edinburgh, we finished the album. We was 1 song short, and it was the first song that I wrote with Brendan, just Brendan and I. It was called Bus 22, and it's actually on my SoundCloud because it's such a good song. But in the process of that, we wrote 21st Century Love Song. And a friend of mine knew Janice Long, and he sent Janice the song, but didn't hear from Janice for like 3 weeks. And she said, I haven't got it, John. So she said to John, send it to me at home. So he sends it at home. She opens it up, puts it on. She plays it. She phones up John and says, can you tell Ian I'm playing it tonight on Radio 2? And then from there, I ended up doing, that was my first, then that was in the October 2005. And in the January 2006, I did my first live session on Radio 2 on Janice's show. Now, what Janice didn't know, that 3 weeks John was there, was actually on tour with the Stones, recording the Stones. And she didn't know that Jesse's dad, is Ronnie Wood, was in the band. So she judged this record, 21st Century Love Song, purely on song. And so the great thing of that period of time was, I would consider myself very much a pioneer of spoken word. This is 2000. Well, actually, it's 2005. But I actually coming back to what I said with HIV. So 2 years. We go back 2 years earlier, which is why I decided when I came out of hospital to make an album. I was living in Spain. And my bank said, "Oh, this guy wants to sell his house. You should go and meet him." So he organised me to go out and see his house. And Trevor lived up in house was beautiful. He had this recording studio in it. And as I was coming out of the studio, there was a CD there, Benjamin Zephaniah. I went, "Oh, I know Benjamin." I said, he came to see me at the Acme Empire in the 80s. And Trevor was very if you know Trevor, he's a beautiful human being, but he's very, what's the word I'm looking for? He's very, very critical, and he's got his dreads, and his dad was Jamaican, his mum was from Liverpool, right? I went, "Oh, yeah, he said, do me a poem." So right there and then I do HIV. So I said, "I'll see you, Trev." So 5 days later, Trevor phones me up. He says, "All right, La." I said, "Trevor, I can't buy your house. I don't know what to do with you." He said, "Ian, I have no interest in sell you my house. For 5 days, you've disturbed me so much. Will you come back to Marbella? And I want to record HIV." And so I was over the moon. I knew who Trevor Morel is. Anybody who Googles Trevor Morel, Trevor is without one of the greatest drummers of the 20th century. I don't know the correct story, but I think Trevor was asked to join the Beatles. So Bill Kenwright phones me up, and he said, "Bill never called me Ian or Wills. He always called me Willing." And Bill himself is an amazing man. He said, "Willing," he said, "I need to ask you a question." I said, "What's that, Bill?" He said, "How do you know Trevor Morel?" And I told him, he said, "Wow." Now, then he tells me that he used to queue up outside the Cavern Club in 1960 to see Trevor drumming. And Trevor, I think, I don't know if it's true or not, I have no idea, but I think that Trevor was originally going to be the drummer in the Beatles, but I think because he was already a bigger star than they were, so Ringo left Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, and Trevor went into their band.
Right.
Right, and anybody who listens to this, if you go on YouTube and Google Trevor Morel and the Peddlers, you'll see what an amazing drummer he is. Trevor pioneered recording drum beats into computers. He is an amazing. His program is so. Anyway, I get to Trevor's studio, and he's sitting there, and I look across, and I see one guy I instantly recognise, and the other guy was quite a large guy. It looked familiar, but I didn't know. So Trevor said, come on in. Like he said, Ian, will you do the poem again? Right, okay. So now I'm singing for my supper. So I do HIV, and the guy that I recognised leans over, opens up his guitar case and says, yeah, I'm in. And that was Alvin Lee.
Right.
Right, and Alvin Lee was one of the greatest blues guitarists we ever had. And anybody, there's only two performances anybody ever talks about Woodstock: Jimi Hendrix and 10 Years After. Alvin Lee was amazing. And the other guy in the room was John Allen Roussel, who did all the stuff with Sting and Bob Marley. And so we did HIV, so we were looking for a name of a band. And Trevor said, and Trevor had been drumming with Bjork, and he did a lot of stuff for Tricky, Underworld, Goldie, and so Trevor said, what are we going to call ourselves? Well, at that time I was 42 and Trevor was 61. So I said, let's call ourselves 103. And we put it out as Trevor Burkett, who owns One Little Indian, we put it out under One Little Indian. So my first commercial recording had Trevor Morel, Alvin Lee, and John Allen Roussel on it. And they were there for no other reason but the weight of my words.
Brilliant.
And you know, Alvin became a really good friend. Trevor is still a good friend. He's suffering got very poor health now. And he was legendary. You know, you sit there and you talk to him about his time with Sinatra or Dizzy Gillespie, or the stuff he did with George Michael, and that's how I had my friendship in that period. Rory Cushnan, who has mixed and done, has worked with me on different tracks over the years. Rory co-wrote "Patience and Amazing" with George,
mm-hmm.
And I knew on this album, if I could get Rory to produce my vocals and mix it, I stood a good chance of getting the album to sound how I wanted it to sound. And coming back to what you're saying about the South London thing and everything else, so you know, that's where the Times described me as the Ian Dury of the 21st century.
Right,
and,
which is it's a classic line on it as well. It's
amazing, and to have my name. I said this in an interview last week. I say all the time, if there's a book of 5,000 musicians and Ian Dury is page 1 and Ian Wills is page 5,000, the fact that we're in the same book for me is just amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've mentioned Bill Kenwright a couple of times as well. Where does the friendship with him come from?
Well, I met Bill you know, because he owned Everton Football Club, and I met him, and you know, in 2008 I did the tracks with I redid Skin with Didier Drogba and Michael Essien,
mm-hmm.
and because of football, my connections in football, I met Bill in the boardroom and whatever, and you know, he was an amazing man. It really was an amazing man, and he became a really good friend. And Jenny, his wife, and she after Bill passed, she sent me a thing. She said he really loved you, and he was an amazing man. And he would always phone me up and ask what he could do to help. He wanted to help. And one of the songs I did before on singles there is a track I did called Mercy's Door, and it's got Moya Brennan on it with me. And he absolutely loved that song. And when he introduced me to Andrew Lloyd Webber, they were doing the co-production at the I think it was Wizard of Oz thing that they did at London Palladium, and I went to the opening night there. And Bill calls me over. He said, "Come over," and he said he went to Andrew. He said, "Andrew, this is Willing, my poet," and I was so proud. And to have that friendship for me was a really special thing in my life. And
See the amount of names you've mentioned so far. I mean, I've got a list of names that you've been associated with, and none of the names you've mentioned so far are on it. It's amazing. It's amazing some of the names that have been dropped so far in this. Um, Obviously, like you touched on the album Curbside, and then the second album Heroes and Villains, which you can't get on Spotify. Is there anywhere
oh,
you're able to get any of them?
so what I'm going to do in September, I'm releasing Curbside and Heroes and Villains. So Heroes and Villains never actually got released because we released Lipstick, which track I did with Tom McRae, which I wrote about the July the 7th bombings.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did Skin with Didier and Michael, but I got really ill again, and my health took a turn for the worse. We played the Isle of Wight Festival, and you know, and we was on the rise, and then I just, you know, there was no point in releasing the album and not being able to support it in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's never been released. It's a fantastic album, and I'm so proud of it. And I think when it comes out in you know, sort of September time, people will listen to it. You know, there's tracks on there like Gun Crime. You know, one of the young guys that worked on it at the time, Daniel Collier, his brother Harry was in Cub, and Daniel was doing the rapping on it. And you know, so you've got a older guy like me, a younger guy like Daniel, and the fusion of the same vision that we see on the streets reflected itself in the music, and the lyrics was always my thing.
Yeah.
And so no, but Curbside was a great. It's got Leanne Carroll on it, who's, you know, she's an amazing singer. Harry Daniel's brother Harry did something on it. So it was a real collaboration, and that's what the Willing is. It's organic all the time.
Mm. I mean, like obviously, like doing my research, obviously, like you mentioned, Lipstick with Tom McRae. I was doing my research last week, and his name came up, and I went back and listened to his debut album, which I played that to death back in the days, but kind of it's been forgotten about for so many years. It's a fantastic album. He's a brilliant writer.
Brilliant. Tom's songs are amazing, and you know, it was what was really cool when I did the second session with Janice. We did Lipstick, and Tom, you know, to do that with Tom for me was a real privilege.
Mm.
And again, that will be out on Heroes and Villains. But if any of your listeners want to listen to it, I have put Lipstick up on my SoundCloud.
Yeah, I'll post a link obviously for your Spotify and stuff like that, but I'll post a link for your SoundCloud as well. Because I've not even been on there to listen.
I put loads of stuff there. I put audio. You know, I'm not afraid to put anything up there. So I put all my demos. I write a song. I'm gonna put it on there, and it's really rough. But you know, if I show the organic, I believe that if I show the organic side of my writing and my early playing with the guitar, you know, don't forget I've taught myself to play the guitar in these last years.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got no shame in sounding as rough as the badger's ass, because it's what being creative is about.
Yeah. So you touched on Janice Long, obviously a big supporter right for kind of the start of your career, right through. Obviously, there was another one, was Les Paul.
So we did some gigs in New York, and I was asked to do the Joey Reynolds talk show, and he agreed with, and even though it was talk radio, his show is the biggest show in New York. But he agreed to play 21st Century Love Song. So we did the gig, and we got to the studio, and the producer said to me, he said, "Oh, there was a guest that was meant to be on before you, but he's running late. Ian, do you mind sharing your hour with him?" I said, "Of course not. I'm just lucky. You know, I'm blessed to be on the radio."
Yeah, he's saying.
So the elevator opens. This old boy walks out, and I said to Jesse, "I know him," and it was Les Paul. So we're in the studio with Les Paul, and so, you know, it was such an honor to sit next to Les and talk, chew the fat and everything. So Joey played 21st Century Love Song. While he was playing it, Les said to me, "Did you really write those lyrics?" And I said, "Yeah." So he finished playing 21st Century, and he then said so Joey said, "So Ian, you know, Les, you're 90 years old this year. There's a big celebration for you've been inducted the second time to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And he stopped in mid-sentence and he said, while this young man is sitting next to me, he said, having just listened to that song, there's some of the best lyrics I've heard recorded in a very, very, very long time. And he championed 21st century love song for me. I was so privileged.
And it must feel amazing for somebody to say that, like somebody as iconic as him as well.
It was amazing.
Hold so much more weight.
And it was live on radio. You can't take it back.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely amazing. There isn't any part of your story that you don't you can't be amazed at. It's crazy.
I am, if I tell the stories of these, if I hadn't lived it, you'd think it was not true.
Yeah.
The great thing is it is true.
Like on your kind of your later albums are on Spotify, which I've been listening to. So obviously, like Dream in Colour, the sound on it, what I got for it sounds a bit like the Streets.
Well, everybody said that, and so I always sang on. Let's just put it in perspective. The Streets. Mike Skinner was still suckling on his mother's breast when I was doing this.
Mm.
So I'm one of those stars where is the wrong word, you see. So like Mike Skinner be putting out his greatest hits. Well, I'll be putting out my greatest misses. If you've listened to Dream in Colour, it's a great album.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody listens to it, I know it's sort of like tracks like Running on Empty, which is Butterflies, which I wrote after, it's written about Wootton Bassett and the soldiers all coming home. They'd queue up to bring the dead soldiers back. And I have been up in Blackpool for the royal performance. And one of the squaddies that was killed, he lived up in that part. And I stood on the street and bowed my head as his coffin went by. And then I sat back down on the bench and I wrote Butterflies. And in Bears and Tigers, I talk about it now because I try to never give a sense of what the songs are about away. But if you listen to Bears and Tigers, the actual clue to what that song's about, I try to imagine if it was my last 8 seconds of being alive in Auschwitz, and what would I feel?
Right.
And the hidden line is there. Is I wrote upon the gates of hell. It read, "Work will set you free." And so that's what. So I imagined, So the opening line was, "Please don't bury me on a rainy day, and I believe every word that you say. Please help me to be strong when I'm feeling weak, and I believe every word that you preach." And so I sort of. I'm extremely proud of Dream in Colour.
Yeah,
it's brilliant because I'll say that now because I took that photo. And so when I did that, I was asked, did I have clearance for the photograph? I said no, but I got it done by Fluke. And I go, well, have you got Fluke's permission? I was going, no, but I don't need it. I know him really well. Now, I was sitting there, I was living in Spain, as saying, my daughter Summer was swimming in school, and I was sitting out on the waiting for her, and I started taking pictures. If you have a look at that picture, and Bill Kenwright, Bill sent me, said, that's got to be Photoshop. I went, no, Bill, have a look. And I showed him pictures before and after. And he's like, wow. So in the artwork, on the credit artwork, it says, it always says album cover by Fluke.
Right.
You have a look at it now. You see, have a look at it now. You'll see he's looking down at his legs. Right, they're not there; they're behind him. Have a look at the bench. You can see it was just actually. I was doing this with the iPhone, and it must have just frozen. And that seemed really split second. It was brilliant.
Yeah, it just everything about everything about your career, like things like this, it just everything makes you think. It kind of it challenges the brain.
Yeah, that's what I try to. That's what I try to do.
Mm. So obviously, like I've said it. It sounds kind of similar in some ways to the streets. The other sounds I got for it were it was kind of like sort of dancey, like Groove Armada,
Yeah, yeah.
and another band that I kind of picked out for it was the Rubber Bandits, who I heard of them through the Trainspotting 2 soundtrack, which
Oh yeah,
again
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah, 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 yeah. It's got lots of different things to it.
we'll probably go into the next album, London Country. Now, obviously, I said about Dream in Colour, some of the kind of bands that it reminded me of, like the Streets, Groove Armada, and the Rubber Bandits. They were bands that I'd mentioned. London Country, the kind of vibe I got for that was Evan Dando, the Lemonheads. I got a bit of that in it, and also somebody that you mentioned earlier in the interview, Billy Bragg. There's a bit of kind of Billy Bragg when he was with Wilco. It sounded
Yeah.
a bit like that. So obviously you mentioned Billy Bragg earlier in the interview. So is he been an influence on that album?
Well, so with London Country, in the process of doing London Country, so I finished Dreaming Colour, and I had uh, during Dreaming Colour, I started to really pick up a guitar and try to work out how can I make an album that is purely an Ian Wills album. By that I mean it's not, there's no such thing as my album. There's no such thing as my band, because nobody has my band. Music's made up of lots of people who collaborate, and without any of them, you've got nothing. And so I've always thought that process through. But sort of between Curbside, Heroes and Villains, and Dreaming Colour, Dreaming Colour, I wrote a little bit of music, especially on Butterflies, but felt that I wanted to, in moving away from spoken word, which I thought I could take, I've taken it as far as I can within the art form of that. I taught myself to play guitar, and so I sort of sat. Billy Bragg was always an inspiration to me. It was always, I from a young Wills to the older Wills, his music is it's always refreshing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily agree with what Billy says politically, but I never put politics into my music. I've avoided that, nor religion. And what I try to do is let people try and interpret what I'm thinking, and leave space for interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always been in love with America. Going back to Spycatcher, without going to America and buying the books, Spycatcher would never have happened to me. The first time I went to New York, was, the thrill of going there has never left me. The first time I went to LA never left me, so it was always in my soul. American music, coming from, even literatures from Steinbeck to Salinger. So I had thought to myself, I need to, if I'm going to go into a studio with some songs, they've got to stand up. So I spent a long time teaching myself guitar. I created a lot of open tunings that are unique to me, so that by virtue of that, from a production point of view, it might get. I knew I was going back to Sean Janocki to do it, and so Sean's very honest in his assessment of what it is that we're doing, and not one to interpret or encourage foolishness within music. So I knew there was a challenge there. But in London Country, so the Ian Jury thing will always be there within that. Billy Bragg was always somebody. He told me in 1986 or 87, whenever that National Sleep Out was, he told me, pick up the guitar and learn to sing. So in that process of Dreaming Colour to London Country, I taught myself to sing as well.
Hmm.
which is a challenge. So I thought about the sort of the songs that I'd written, and High Plains Drifter. I'm a massive Clint Eastwood fan, especially as spaghetti westerns and whatever. So I thought about that, and I people asked me to sort of, I did a very detailed What London Country About, and I said, imagine it's sort of Clint Eastwood coming out of sort of dusty the bars and brushes himself off in the Midwest and walks into the saloon, looks up the bar and says, "Do you have any Lapsam Souchong?" So it was that sort of feel, like the unexpected. And there is a real sort of sadness about London Country, but there's also an amazing story behind it. So as I went into doing the album, I took the songs into Sean, Lobster and Chips, coming back to my friendship with Bill Kenwright. Bill used to love to go to Las Ambassadors in a casino in Mayfair, and he invited me for dinner one Friday night, and I was there with Jenny, and I sort of sat there and watched everybody gambling, and I came home and I wrote Lobster and Chips. So of course, and the line, when you're buying lobster with casino chips, all you have to do, my friend, is let your fingers click.
Hmm.
And that was that song came from there. Crushed by Seven Winds. I thought about a man's last, his disappointment in his marriage. When he realizes that there's nothing left, he snaps. And I also took a reference to Emmett Till. And Emmett was hung. I think he was the first. He went into town, allegedly looked at a white man's wife, and they came and got him, and they took him and they hung him from a bridge.
Right.
And my sister, who Linda was extremely educated. She did a degree at Bristol. She found me out. I was always an enigma to her because she couldn't work it out. You see, and I just don't get it. You didn't do any. My sister knew me better than anybody. But she said, you know what? I'm so proud of you that you took a moment of history and put it into a song. And Frenchie, so I signed Dream in Colour to Flick Knife Records. And Frenchie's a punk by name, and he's a wonderful man. But he said to me, he said, Ian, it's been the first time in a long time I've heard somebody mention the name of Emmett Till. So I was proud of that. And then we had finished the album, and the last track, I knew that it was missing the song. And my older sister Linda, I absolutely adored. And in the process of making the album, Linda passed away in the April of 2018, just before her 57th birthday. And I spent the last 4 days with her in the hospital. I never left her side. And the Thursday night, what happened was they withdrew all treatment on the Thursday afternoon, and they put her into a separate bed, in a private room, and I was expecting her to pass away on that Thursday evening. So we sat there, and I just held her hand. I didn't let go of it, and she woke up, and we watched the dawn break out of the hospital window in Guildford. And so anybody who's listening to this podcast, listen to Greatest Ever Smile. The opening lines said, "My hand felt like the Bible as I held your hand through the night." So literally, Linda passed away at 7 o'clock on that Sunday. I went home and wrote Greatest Ever Smile. And then I phoned Sean up and I said, "I've got to put this, we need to stop everything else. And I need to put this track on the album." And so, and then the album was released, and there's a anybody listen to SoundCloud. So Rory, who had mixed, going back to Rory, from doing the 103 and everything else. So Rory worked with George Michael for a long time, and he co-wrote "Patience and Amazing" and did mixing for George. And I asked Rory if he could do a mix of "Greatest Ever Smile" for me, because so Rory's got his first two Grammys, his two Grammys because for mixing the first two Mumford and Son albums.
Right.
So he really knows what he's doing. And then he said to me, he said, "Ian, this is your Careless Whisper." He said, "I struggled mixing this song." He said, "It's so beautiful." And I was quite surprised that it never got picked up on radio again. Maybe people just don't want to play my music on mainstream radio. I don't know. It's one of those things that you scratch your head and wonder why. I know that you've listened to a lot of my songs, and you're probably asking yourself the same question.
Yeah, I mean, well, like just touching on the Greatest Ever Smile, because it is a standout song. Like it's the one that I kind of kept going back to for that album. But for you to then kind of embellish on why it was written, how it was written, and all that, it kind of increases it tenfold. You know what I mean? It's like it's such a kind of beautiful story. That I mean, like all through this podcast, you've had all these kind of beautiful moments, beautiful stories to tell. It's kind of amazing.
Well, there was something then even more spiritual about that album. So so I lived on the Roundshaw estate, as I said, and I saw this picture of a bus that was picture must have been late 60s, early 70s. And I thought, wow, that's quite inspiring. So I contacted the guy whose picture it was. And he sent me some other photos. And the one that I chose wasn't actually his. And so he was a really nice man. He said, "Ian," I said, "Is there any chance you could get me permission?" He said, "Well, it was from an archive. The guy who took the picture has passed away, but I might find a contact for his family." So he doesn't know me from a row of beans. Spent a long time, and he tracked down the family and got me permission for that photograph. So it goes onto the album cover, and I did some interviews, and then I did one for Radio Caroline. And the guy that show that I was on had got an email from if we have a look at those two buses, the bus that is pulling out, his wife was driving that bus.
Right.
And the fact that his wife was on the cover of my album and she had passed away, and it just felt so spiritually amazing to have that karma on a piece of work. And so I figured these things, Martin, that things happen for a reason. And I think the reason was, first of all, at the end of that journey of London Country, I felt that I had achieved a point where I was now can have the confidence to sing. I had the confidence to play. I had the confidence to feel that if this was the last album I made, that I had encapsulated something for Linda, encapsulate something for my life as a songwriter, and then to have that photo that he's got a memory of his wife. On it's just
that'll be there forever.
It's there forever, and it's stunning. And so I was very proud of London Country. Iceberg got played. I got quite a lot of play in Nashville, and I got Peder came and played the drums and what have you, and one of the tracks I got Vinnie Jones to do a chant on it, because he was narrating his book at the studio where I did all the vocals, Nick Soden's studio down in West Sussex, and Vinny was also doing his audio cast. And I had this idea to just get this chant on, and so Vinny did that. And so, it was an album where I still never, I had a lot of fun about it. And then, so Linda passed away in the April. Now, this was the really weird thing. So Linda was diagnosed, Linda went to hospital in the October, and they said she had appendicitis. They did the operation, and it turned out she had tumor in her stomach, which caused the appendix to erupt. They said that the margins were clear, that the chemotherapy was going to be curative, and that she would enjoy the rest of her life. And then before she started her chemotherapy, they discovered that she had what was called a neuroendocrine. And then, so she had 6 months to a year left. So she died for 4 months. She died within 4 months of that diagnosis. But when she was diagnosed in that October, she was 56 and 7 months. So London Country, Linda's last words to me in that hospital was, "Ian, please, I've been having a few problems with my health." And the day that she passed away, my phone rang, and it was the hospital wanting to take me into, I had what's called BPH, which is enlarged prostate. Mm-hmm. And they called me in to do a operation. And I had said that, well, what's the risk of infection? I wouldn't make my sister's funeral. And I just spent 10 days, I was wiped out. I could not go to Linda's funeral. But her last words to me were, "Ian, you've got to sort your health out." Now, with one of the other problems I've got this really problem on my right ankle. And when I was going to do the operation in the October, when Linda was dying, if they'd done that, I wouldn't have been able to drive for 6 months. So I gave up the operation, and because there's no way I could not be with my sister. Mm-hmm. And anybody actually listening to this, one thing I learned about those last 5 months, and maybe people will relate to this, was, first of all, we grew up in this particular environment, but nobody touched my younger brother or my elder sister because of who their brother was. Right? I was a raving psychopath. Mm. So nobody wanted to risk that. So Linda, we were real working class kids. She got she had 13 O levels. She got 2 A levels. She got a double first at Bristol. Right? She was a really she would always tell me off, always frustrated with me, but she adored me. And her last words to me were, "Please get your health sorted out." So I delayed having the operation on my ankle. I couldn't face having the TERP. And then the summer passes. I decided to have the operation on my ankle, but just as about to do it, the anaesthetist came out and she said, "Have you?" And I disguised, because I promised Linda I would get this done. Now, I disguised that I'd got a bit of an infection in my chest, but they refused to then do the operation because the anaesthesia, I might end up dead. Mm-hmm. So they put, I sort of, that delayed itself. And then I went to see U2 at the O2 with a friend of mine. And I kept going to the bathroom, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to call the hospital up again. So I called the hospital up, and they said, "Well, actually, you're still on the list to have this TERP, so can you come in?" And there was a new thing that they were doing for enlarged prostates, and that was that. So I ended up having an MRI, and then they then turned around and said to me, "Well, actually, Ian, we're going to make another appointment for you," and I saw the urologist, and I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. At that moment, I was 56 and 7 months, the same age Linda was. And now, so that was that point. And the other point of what I was going to get to listen to was, in those last 4 months of Linda's life, every time I saw her, and I went to the house, we left the house, I went and spent Christmas with her, and we cooked Christmas dinner. The most difficult thing was walking out of her house, thinking I might never see my sister again. And every time I left the house, I sobbed my heart out. And so I think anybody that sort of experiences these things and these emotions, it alters your life, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. My being diagnosed with prostate cancer actually turns out to be, I still got it. I'm on active surveillance and I'm meant to have a vasectomy, but there's other things going on at the moment. But what it does, it instilled in me how important life is.
Yeah.
And that, you know, you've got to rise, you've got to find, you've got to fight. And so I sort of take all of those emotions, I think, into my music and into my life. And I think that was sort of the spirit of London country. You know, finished the album, Linda passed, I started promoting it. I get diagnosed with prostate cancer. We were up for playing Glastonbury. COVID came along, killed it. You know, I tried to hustle for 20 years to get onto Glastonbury, and I got a slot, and COVID killed it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, so London country for me was a really wonderful and sad time at the same time.
I mean, it must obviously, like you're talking about it, so it's always going to be a reminder of that time as well for you, for your sister. It must be in some ways quite therapeutic as well.
Yeah, you know, I haven't had a drink since the 6th of August, 1995.
Right.
I'm an alcoholic. I was diagnosed with alcoholic liver disease. And so I've been dry since then. I gave up hard drugs 2-3 years earlier. And so, you know, you learn to condition your brain. So the only escape that I've got in terms of that is my writing. And I've channeled that into being Ian Wills, if that makes sense. The good and the bad, the acceptance of many things, wanting to change the world, wanting to still fight, remaining humble, and never forget. As I said, you know, you'll never ever heard, there's nowhere I've ever said my band. I'm in a band, and I think that it's like we're all part of something, and it's recognizing that. And you know, I try to be the best dad I can be. I try to be the best person I can be. And you know, when I was younger, we haven't touched on this, but when I did my book, Nothing to Lose, in the process of doing that book, I really exposed myself to younger me. And one of the things that I did when I was 13 and a bit years old was I snatched this lady, I mugged her. It's the only way you can put it. You know, I snatched her handbag. And in the process of doing the book, my conscience, even now, is not clear. It hangs heavy on me, and you know, we were all living the same poverty. Nobody, you know, you realise nobody was rich, and the money we stole from her was probably the money she had to feed her kids that week. And so some things you never escape, and some things you continue to try to make amends for. So I sort of, in my life, as I got older, I try to do good things in a kind way. Like an example was when my two youngest daughters were like little babies. Going back to Linda, for instance, so you know, during the Balkans War, the people who escaped Sarajevo and they were turning up here. So there was a refugees that were taken in by Linda's church. So Linda phoned me up and she said, I said, what are you doing? She said, oh, there's 20 odd that have turned up in our church and they had escaped Sarajevo. So I said, okay, I'll come, I'll come. And she said, well, you sure you want to? I said, yeah, I'll come down. So when in church, there was these women and children. Their feet they had nothing on their feet. They had no clothes. Their husbands and brothers and that, all in such a terrible state. So the first thing I did, Linda said, so what can I do? She said, right, go down to Sainsbury's. She said, and you need to buy, and she gave me this list. So I went down to Sainsbury's, toothpaste, soap, mouthwash, clothes. And then Grace and Lucia, my two young eldest, that were little babies. Well, yeah, babies. They were like, I think they were 6 and 4, something like that. I said, right, come on, let's go home, and we've got to get some toys because there's kids here. The kids have got nothing. So we went home, and I said, Grace and Lucia, right, choose your 2 toys that you want to keep, and the rest we're putting in bags. And they asked me why, and I told them without any question. They balanced back all their toys. We went back to the church, and we gave the toys to these kids. Now, one of them, one family she helped for all their life. She sponsored them, paid for them. They got jobs. They still live here. She helped. I forget her name. I could ask my brother-in-law, but she got her into university, and now she's a lawyer. And so good comes from good, like bad comes from bad.
Yeah.
And then so I used to then take the kids. There was a children's hospital called Queen Mary's Hospital, and on Easter we would phone up the children's ward and see how many kids were in there over Easter. So Grace and Lucia, we would go down to Sainsbury's. We'd buy Easter eggs and just drop them off at the door. And I think that those sort of acts of kindness, whilst you are helping somebody else who feels amazing, in being absolutely honest with yourself, you feel better than anybody you've helped.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have to be honest about that.
It's probably the greatest kind of drug you can ever have is kind of the making somebody else feel good. It's better than feeling good yourself.
So we finished London Country, and we touched on about I had my friend James Millman. I had known for a long time, so I asked him to make me a guitar, and it was a talented sort of way. So the day that and I'm going to get my phone, I'm going to get the text up in a minute, and I'll read it to you. The week before I'm going to pick the guitar up, James lived down in Bideford, and if I don't think much positive comes from social media, not in this modern times. But this is an example of something does come good. I know for my sins, I knew Max Clifford, and I also know Gary Farrow. And Gary Farrow is everything Gary Farrow did good in. Max Clifford wanted to be Gary Farrow. I honestly believe that. And so Gary had posted a picture of a young boy down in Cornwall who had lost his arms and legs, and he's a Tottenham fan. And the picture said, why doesn't anybody want to play football with me? And I saw it. I saw it with Farrow, and I was like, wow. So I didn't do anything. I didn't say anything. And while we're talking, I sort of get this up, and I thought, what can I do? So you've seen that I got a connection at Chelsea. And I phoned up my friend at Chelsea and I asked if they had any cup final tickets left. And Chelsea weren't in it. They said they'd returned their allocation. So I thought, well, do you know what? I'll phone up Bill. And so I phoned up Bill and I left a message with him. And he came back to me and he was like, William, what is it? So I tell him the story. And I thought to myself, and within it, so look, you can just see, I don't actually see the picture there. See the picture?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I sent to boss. I said, morning, Bill. I hope you're okay. Will you be sending your allocation of the F Cup title back? I'm trying to get a pair for a young boy and his dad. The young boy's got no arms or legs. He's football crazy like kids are. Never been to a game. Is a Spurs fan, but reality is anything will do. I've asked David, but he's given his pair away. So 3rd of May 2016. So I sent that to Bill 3rd of May at 11:51 before midday, right? 12 minutes past 10 in the evening. And Bill never called me Ian or anything. I told you, just called me Willing, right? I was willing to him.
Mm-hmm.
He said, Willing, I have the 3 best seats in Wembley, under the roll box and the halfway line in the Bobby Moore Club, together with lovely meal, drinks, etc. in Lang's type area. I share a table for 6 with someone else. The 3 tickets and car park, etc. are yours for the final for the boy with my compliments. M, who is his secretary, can send all the telltales and give them my love. I said, Bill, you're amazing. Thank you so much. You will make this little boy's life. And he just said to me, he used to take them. So now I phone up the guy. I don't know anything. The guy who posted the picture on Facebook. I phoned up. I thought it was his son. He said, no, it's my next door neighbour. I said, so this is what I've done. The young boy's name's Moss. And he went, really? He said, Ian, let me just go and get, they live next door. So the dad comes on the phone and I tell him what I've done. And he said, are you really serious? I said, yeah. And so I got the mum to meet me at James's shop 4 days later with Bill's passes and everything. And they had the best day ever. So the first time he took his kid to a football match was a cup final.
Brilliant.
I phoned up Farrow and I said to Gary, I said, you know, mate, I said, you know, I said, I know you may find me a bit of an annoyance because I was always asking Gary to help me with my music. And, you know, Gary was looked after that time. He was still looking after Elton John, Sharon Osbourne, you know, sort of, I think he still was working with George and what have you. And so I was too small beans or maybe too much hard work. But Gary just said to me, he said to me, you know, I said to him, you have no idea what good you did by reposting that. And so there's the power of something really positive.
Yeah.
And I think sort of music, you know, music was, and I was meant to go down and do a gig for them for Moss, but they couldn't put it together. But and I just saw recently him now as a teenager, and boy, is that man, the young kid growing. But you know, I was so blessed to be able to pick my phone up and speak to people and make something happen.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Just another cracking story to just chuck into this podcast. Throughout the podcast, you've mentioned all sorts of names. You've thrown in names just willy-nilly. It's like all sorts. And one thing you said about the band is you refer to it as a band. It's no you, it's the band, and it's everything. Looking at the musicians that you surrounded yourself with, in the making of the new album, if I could rhyme off the bands that these musicians have worked with, if you bear with me, because this is a long list that I've wrote down. The Who, the Manic Street Preachers, Kula Shaker, Albert Hammond, Lou Reed, Marianne Faithfull, Paolo Nutini, Imelda May, Ronnie Wood, Mark Ronson, White Denim, First Aid Kit, Squeeze, Robbie Williams, Ray Davies, Mark Knopfler, Death in Vegas, Iggy Pop, Liam Gallagher. I had to turn the page because it's on another page. Earth, Wind and Fire, Bette Midler, Ray Charles, Michael and Janet Jackson, Roberta Flack, Jules Holland, and Shane MacGowan. And I'd imagine I probably missed some out there, but so these musicians that you're working with have worked with all these people. So you're surrounding yourself with quality and probably a bit of history as well. And does that make it easier then to make the new record when you've got such a talented group around you?
Well, it comes back to when we come back. Well, we start back with London's Country because the all the keyboard and pianos on that was done by Mick Talbot, and when Mick is sort of Style Council was one of my favourite bands. Mick played Live Aid. He's Mick Talbot. He's and what a nice man. But so I asked Mick. So Sean had worked with Mick on they did an album with Dave Eringo producing it for Roger Daltrey.
Right.
And Mick played the keyboards and that, and Sean did some of the engineering and did the guitars and whatever you. So I asked Sean, could you ask Mick if he'd be up for doing the keyboards and that on London Country? So he said, well, let me send him what we've got. And so he sent him, and Mick came back and said yes. So at the end of the first session with Mick, we was getting into the cars. I said, Mick, can I just ask you a question, mate? I said, why did you agree to do it? He said, I love the lyrics. And I was like, that's the key. So I was like, if you get those people's attention. So then when coming into another long week, I was even further determined to try and write better songs, or not necessarily better songs, songs with deeper scope, tuning wise, or interest, color, and it works that same way. That when you work with producers who see the vision of what you're trying to do and have got access to some of those musicians, they can send it out, and if they like what they hear, they get on board, and that's what I'm blessed. Like for instance, Adam Chetwood, who's on the album. Adam's been playing with me since 2008. He did stuff on Heroes and Villains, the second album, and it's wonderful to see Adam playing with Imelda and Paolo. Donnie Little, Donnie would just finished touring with Imelda, and so he was Simon, from Squeeze. Squeeze had just come off the road, so he did the drums for 3 of the tracks. So sometimes it's timing, sometimes it's luck, but it's not luck in the sense of it's luck that you have been blessed to produce something that an interest going. And then when you hear the results of your ideas, it's phenomenal. I knew on this album that the key to success for me. So when we did London Country, Sean did all the music, produced all the music, and then I went and did all the vocals with Nick, and was a really enlightening way of doing it. Nick got the best out of me vocally, but I knew with another long week, if I could get the attention of Rory and ask him if he'd be up for producing the vocals and mixing the album, that it would be a real step for me. And so the combination of the musicians who clearly have produced some amazing music, Rory's devotion to me as a friend and producing my vocals, Gallia, he got Gallia in to do all the BVs and the harmonies, and so he saw his interpretation and vision, having done my vocals, he brought that to life. We talked about what we saw, and I, he just did it. I was just so happy with what he did, and his mixing of the album is amazing. And you know, I know that what happened was he said to me when I sent him the demos, he said to me, and this is I think this is the most complete album you've done. And yes, I would love to produce your vocals. So I went to Dublin. We did it over 3 sessions. Like I think we did. I think it was 12 days. I did the vocals over, and then he mixed it over a period of time. You know, Rory's in so much in demand that he sort of said, well, you know, I'll get the first batch done, then I've got to do an album, mix an album for sound. So I'd seen that during that period that him and Sheeran were in the studio doing stuff again, and that, so I don't, you know, there was lots of pressure on Rory
Yeah.
because I think he mixed the first 2 or 3 Sheeran albums. You know, so you know his mixing is in huge demand. So he said, look, if there's no pressure, we do the first 3 tracks, we do the second, and then we just did it that way around. And so he would then able to block off like a you know, a period of time and in between doing singles or albums for other people. And never, but he never took his eye off the ball.
It's
And
brilliant. You must you seem to have so much kind of respect in the industry for so many people. It must stand you in good stead.
I think you know, when Janice played 21st Century Love Song for the first time on Radio 2, I can't tell you how rewarded and fulfilled I felt. And when she came, so Janice, at the end of the UK tour of Curbside, Janice came down to see us do a gig at the Cobden Club. And then she drove back up to Birmingham because that's where her show was done. And then she then came on air and she said, I've just come back from London from seeing Wheels and the Willing. And she was so complimentary about what it was we were doing. And she continually played 21st Century Love Song. And then when I did my first live session for her in the January of that following year, so it'd be 2006, it was an incredible experience. You know, I was so nervous. We're live on Radio 2. I think I remember we did 3 or 4 songs, and I obviously did a chat, and what blew me over was the responses that were coming in. And Matt, who at that time was helping, my dear friend, he's still got it archived, was all the printouts of people complimenting me for our performances and the songs. And so I have huge respect for everybody. And I hope that I never have once even got arrogant about anything, because, you know,
You've definitely not come across that way in the interview. You
know, I just know inside of me that I've learned a lot in my life. You know, I'm a father to 3 girls. I want to try and leave a legacy of wisdom and fond memories of my life. And you know, we all do stupid things or act stupid sometimes. None of us are without that. But I try to, on the whole, just keep myself respected of everybody around me. And I seem to get respect from those people. And my friendships, if you know, I always believe if you make a friend, it can be for 24 hours, it could be for 24 months, or it could be for all of your life. And some people come in for your life for a reason, go out for your life for a reason, and some people stay in your life even if you're not in your lives all the time, but
Mm-hmm.
the dots remain joined. And then what happens is when Linda passed away, or Andrew passed away, or other friends of mine passed away, when they pass away, they were part of the architects of your life. They know the stories of your life, and that when they die, part of you dies with them. And so I try to remember that. And Bill passing away was such a sad thing for me because he was such a wonderful friend. Never was I too much. Bill came, I didn't need me. What was he need Ian Wheels for? Nothing. But he was a friend. And Jenny said to me, I think I said to you before, he loved me, truly loved me. And he sent in that last few months of his life last year, he sent me some amazing texts of our friendship. And I just feel like I'm blessed to and I think I said to you earlier on Another Long Week, the only dedications I've put on the album is to Andrew, my friend Andrew, and to Bill. I didn't mention my wife, my kids, nothing, because I sort of thought, well, there's some songs on Another Long Week, which First Violin is actually about my love with my wife. When I met her, I always say to her, "You're my June Carter." And in the film Walk the Line, when he walks to the house and he's begging June to come back. So that's what Walk to Albuquerque was really about. And the irony of that was I'm a massive Prefab Sprout fan. Steve McQueen, one of the albums of my life is Steve McQueen, right? And King of Rock and Roll. So before I went to record the vocals for Walk to Albuquerque, I went and did a bit of pre-production with Nick. And literally, when I finished working there, I swear to you, I get in the car and King of Rock and Roll came on the radio, and I was like, "There's signs all over." And so the dedication to people in my life is actually in the music. So the space left on that last page in the booklet, I just wrote about Andrew and I wrote about Bill. And
Yeah.
if the last album I make, then it's a fitting thing, I think. I hope it's not the last album I make, but we never know what's around the corner.
As well as that, obviously you've touched a few times on your love for Bruce Springsteen, big Bruce Springsteen fan. On the album, you get a co-write with Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, but you don't know about it.
Right. So tell us a wee bit about that then. How does that come about?
So I think I told you, I lived in New Zealand for a year when I was a boy. And when that year that I lived there, Born to Run broke. And I fell in love with that song. As a 12-year-old kid, I fell in love with Bruce Springsteen. And then I started going out nicking, and then I got get money to buy the first albums. And Bruce has been in my life nigh on 50 years. And in the last 50 years, I must have dreamed about Bruce about 50,000 times. It's always my dreams, right? And so one morning I got up and I said to Laurie again, I dreamt about Bruce again last night, and I never actually get to meet him. I can tell you this. So the first time I went to saw Springsteen on Broadway, it was in the January of 2018. Initially it was a small run he was doing. I managed to get tickets, and I'd worked out where he was going to, where the theatre was. There's only one entrance, so I worked out exactly where he would have to come to enter the theatre. So I get there like 5 o'clock. Bruce pulls up, and there's a little crowd, and literally, Martin, he's walking around here, and I get people just here, and he walks back in. I can actually send you the video of it. I thought, bloody hell. And then so I was like, huh. And then the second time we saw him, when they relaunched Broadway, he agreed to do another 6 weeks. Laurie and I went to see, and actually we walked around. And I was explaining to the last time, and he pulls up again, but because it's still the back of COVID, he just waved, and I got a picture, but I never got to meet him. I was lucky enough in 2000 and I can't remember, was the first London Blues Festival. Max Weinberg played under the bridge at Chelsea's place, and
Hmm.
I was lucky enough to after the show I sat in Max's dressing room and we talked to hang out in the dressing room with Max. I got to meet Niels Lofgren a couple of times in London. So I get up in the morning, I say to Laurie, I dreamt about Bruce last night. And then I thought to myself, I wonder if Bruce ever dreams about Ian Wills. And then I thought about it. I thought, actually, I wonder if Bruce dreams like we all dream. So then I thought about that. So then I thought, well, I'm going to write a song about my love of his music and the influence of his music in my life. And in the early years of my life, when I really needed something, the music, my first spot was Bruce. You know, I did an interview when we did the your listeners can so when we did the UK tour, the Guardian asked me to do interview for the gig of a lifetime.
Hmm.
So when Springsteen played Wembley in '85, Wembley Stadium, um, I went every night. And they said to me, "Well, what was?" And the he did a version of No Surrender. Now the journalist that was asking me this, he actually was at that gig, so he knew what I was talking about. And I said, I came home that night, and I was so filled with inspiration. I was so more alive in my soul. I said, I even thought about how I made love to my girlfriend and realized that it wasn't just about me. And then they actually put that in the newspaper, in the article. If you want to Google it, it's there. So there's this massive impact his music's had on my life. Nebraska, again, you know, when I've had my darkest thoughts, I would go to Nebraska. So then I thought about it. So I thought, I'm going to write a song to Bruce. And so what I came up with the idea was, I took a character or a line from a Springsteen song in the first two verses. I wrote the chorus, and I took the line, "Tramps like us, we were born to run." And then the third verse is my thank you to Bruce. And I think I said, you know, and here's from me to you for the soundtrack of my life, where the pen and guitar always blunts the knife. And I was a man of violence, right? So that was my thing. Now, so Laurie then said to me, I just written that really the music wasn't in any way fit or proper to play. She said to me, you should do something with these lyrics. Now, where we live in Arizona, Niels Lofgren lives 5 minutes from us. So and she kept pushing me and pushing me. So eventually I write him a little note and I put, we drive up to his house like two stalkers. And at Neil's house, it says, you know, no trespassing, you know where he's at, but he's got his mailbox. So we put it in the mailbox. And then I was here and Laurie phoned me up and she said, do you know this person? And there's an envelope here to me. And on the back of it, it's who it's from. And Niels had taken the time to write back to me and said, wonderful lyrics, love it. And he said, you need to do something. And he gave me some stuff and signed them for me and what have you. And then and then recording the song, I was just so it's my thank you to him. So of course I'm published by Sony Music, Springsteen, Sony Music now I own all of him. So I am, you know, it's a co-write between myself and Springsteen. And so, you know, obviously it's I sent it to Jim Rotolo, who does the Springsteen, you know, the E Street Radio on Cyrus. He does all of that. So I sent it to Jim Rotolo, and I know he sent me back, love it. I sent it to his sister, love it. You know, so you know, it's my thank you to him.
Brilliant.
And
Yeah.
and I know Amy and Nils have listened to it because they sent me messages back.
Another class story, and it's as a salesman, it's just all the way through this podcast. It's just been story after story. It's a wonderful life you've lived. You must
I've
be
been
so
blessed.
privileged.
You know, I've been really blessed. You know, my health is a challenge, and I do face a bit of an uphill battle now. I was meant to have the vasectomy, so I went last year and had a TERP. Eventually, I had to surrender to that because prostate was so enlarged. And here's the thing. So coming back to when I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, so I had I did on the MRI. They graded anybody who listens to this. You know, we're men, right? We're getting old, so you can talk of your experiences. So I was graded. They do it on the MRI. It's PI1, PI2, 3, 4, 5. So I was a PI RAD 4/5. So there was a good possibility that I had cancer. But so my appointment was on Christmas Eve, 2018. And so I get there. My appointment was at like 10:30. So I try to be punctilious wherever possible. So I got there like 9:45, and there's myself, there was old couple in front of me, and there was somebody behind me. So the old couple go in, and as their door opens, I can see that there's a doctor there, and there's two nurses I can see. So they go in, and they're in there for a period of time, and they come out and clearly distraught. So not in any way good news for them. And about 5 minutes later, one of the nurses comes out and says, right, I'm going to go back to the ward. So I'm now sitting there for 10 minutes because I know that when they break the news you've got cancer, there's a doctor and there's always two nurses, normally Macmillan nurses, there to just give you support. And, you know, these things are quite intense to take in. So the nurse has gone. So I'm thinking, well, there's only one nurse left in that room and the doctor. I can't have cancer. I'm bulletproof because I do believe I'm bulletproof. So I'm sitting there. Ian, doctor. So I go in the room and as I open the door, there was another nurse in there. There'd been three nurses in there, but I only ever saw two. My first reaction was, this ain't going to go well, is it? and I sat down and obviously they explained to me that I got cancer. And you know, it was Christmas Eve. I did it on my own, and when you come out of that and you have this, then the nurse takes you into another room, and then she asks you lots of questions, and I always try to find a funny point. And one of the questions they ask you is, are you sexually active? You know, I said, well, you tell me a man that isn't. She said, my husband. And it just made me laugh. It just broke it. And so I drove back and I thought to myself, I'd lost Linda. Same year that she's died, I've now got cancer. I'm going to try and do something good every day that I'm alive. And you know, sometimes I forget to do it. So they put me on active surveillance. Because you know, there's lots of complications. And at this point, I'm 56. So I've got it really young. And I was 6 on the Gleason score, and I was on active surveillance. I still am. But so last year I was having really bad problems. So I agreed in the end to have a TERP. And what a TERP is sort of that they shave a little part of the prostate away from the bladder where it's enlarged. I'd had a RESM 4 years earlier, which was they do it with hot steam into the prostate, and it didn't work for me. So I still had the same problem. So I had the TERP. And the operation was a success. The recovery was an absolute disaster. I was in pain. I was admitted back into hospital twice. You have no idea. So 6 weeks downstream, I'm a little bit better. And I'm told I've got an appointment with urology. So I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, there ain't nobody here. This is a bit quiet for an outpatient's appointment. And I go in, I sit down, and the doctor says to me, "Well, you know why you're here, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, about like follow up for my TERP." He said, "No, Ian, from the shavings, your cancer's upgraded. Your cancer is now, getting worse, and it's time to do something." So because I had the TERP, which meant that I couldn't have brachytherapy. One of the other problems I've got with my health is I've been immune suppressed for 23 years. So I had psoriasis, which turned into psoriatic arthritis and rheumatoid arthritis. But my immune system is trying to kill me. So the way you deal with it, I've been on a thing called infliximab for 23 years, and yet every 6 weeks you have an infusion. It suppresses your anti-TNF alpha.
Right.
So therefore, because I'm immune suppressed, I couldn't have a brachytherapy. So I thought, okay, maybe we could have radiotherapy. The oncologist that I've got is a really, really good man. And so I started as part of they start you on hormone therapy first. And I was in so much pain that in the end, I had to come off it. So it ruled out me being able to have radiotherapy. So I agreed in the end to have a radical prostatectomy. I go to see the surgeon, and he's a young surgeon, same age as my oldest daughter. And I came out thinking, I ain't letting you take it out. and I'm sure he could do. So I procrastinated again, and then my urologist is a really good guy, Jordan, and I reached out to him and said, "Look, is there any way? I've just finished this album. If I have a prostatectomy, I won't be able to do any gigs. Minimum is a year to recover, and all the problems that I've got would be worse." So he agreed with that, and we did another MRI, but in the process, I still did the pre-assessment to have the prostatectomy. So under part of that, they asked me to do a liver scan. So this was in February this year. So I do the liver scan, and now, unfortunately, I've got cirrhosis of the liver. And so the battles I face are huge.
Oh.
And I don't drink. I had alcoholic liver disease 30 years ago, and unfortunately, I got what is called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and it's metabolic. So it's disease progression.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think at the moment it's what they call compensated. I'm stage 3, and obviously I've got the cancer inside me. So I got to have a couple of more tests to see. If I've only got a couple of years left to live, then I'm not going to go and have a prostatectomy, because why am I going to spend 2 years of my life recovering from a surgery? I might as well go back in the studio, record another album, write another book, and deal with it that way. If I've got 5 years left, then maybe that's another conversation. But at the moment, as we're talking, I've got some tests at the end of the month, which will determine just how long I've got left. And so there's all these other things. I've already got type 2 diabetes. I've got hypertension. I've now got enlarged artery in my heart. So all these things, like, it's almost, you feel like there's a perfect storm building up.
Yeah.
I've fought many battles in my life. I've fought drug addiction. I've fought alcoholism. As you explained in an earlier podcast, I nearly lost my life with septic arthritis. I had an operation on my stomach because, again, from all the drugs and smoking, the acid erode my esophagus. So I had part of my stomach was used to rebuild that, and I got post-operative pneumonia. I survived everything, and I had to fight hard. And so now I'm facing challenges yet to be determined. The unknown is the unknown. But the thing I take all of this is coming back to rehearsals on Monday. There's these young kids in the studio with us who are so excited they have their own music. They don't need to get excited by mine, but it's so excited to be part of being involved in my music that it's just like it's a really refreshing part of what 2024 is about for me.
Totally. It's you can tell. I mean, you sound so upbeat. You've sounded so upbeat all the way through the interview. And that's testament to yourself. It's not going to beat you.
No, so I played the Isle of Wight Festival in 2008, right? And every year, I would send John Giddins, who owns the Isle of Wight Festival, can I play this year? Can I play this year? And the answers always was no. So in October last year, I sent John an email. I said, it's your perennial email from me. And I sent it at like 10 past 9 on a Friday evening. 13 minutes past 9 on Friday evening, John emailed me back and said, you deserve a yes. And so I like, and so my thing is that, like, if in success there is failure, because the only way you know success is recognizing failure. If you stop, then it's failed. So you mentioned you're helping a young band. Anything I'm going to impart to them, as I said to you earlier, right? For every yes you get in the music business is a result of 1,000 no's. So map out your career. If you're lucky, you might get 12 yeses. That means you've had 12,000 no's. If you can't take that, this being wanting to be on stage or make music is maybe something you should reconsider. And if the art's inside you, it's inside you forever.
Yeah.
I wrote this poem. Before we go, I'll tell you a little story. I wrote this poem when I was 8 years old, right? There is a mouse that lives in my house, for heaven's sake. He's squeaking, talking, tapping, what were keeping me awake. The mouse stopped dead and turned his head and said, I beg your pardon. I'd rather freeze on a piece of cheese than move into your garden. Right? Now, I taught my eldest daughter, Grace, that. So National Poetry School, junior school, she puts that poem in. Grace, she writes it, puts her name on it, don't even mention her dad. No, she did mention that me, I think. And it got published. And then Lucia, National Poetry Day, 2 years later, she uses that poem, puts it in. Now she's going to be up for recognised for it. And we're sitting back in the car, and then Grace says to Lucia, Chi, you should be aware. I think that poem got published. That poem got published. And the look at her face. So I said, well, you know what? It's yours, because in a way, I gave it to you. And and the other thing I always taught them was I learned how to spell when I was 7 years old the word Australopithecine. And for some, all my 3 girls, they know how to spell that word. So like it stays within you. And what I would say was, in the younger me, the white noise that was in my head that I didn't understand turned out to be, in the end, it was the music, it was the words, it was the creativity.
Yeah.
And I think that I just don't know how to not stop.
So the last bit of the podcast, obviously, it's God Time for Heroes, and normally what I do is I ask my guests to pick 4 heroes to come for dinner, why they're your heroes, and what would you cook for them. But I mean, all the way through this, we've talked about so many people in your life that are probably heroes in some way. So if you could whittle it down to 4, just quickly.
Jake Salinger, Catcher in the Rye, was the first book that I really got. Steinbeck, Grapes of Wrath and Mice and Men.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously Bruce. And at the end of the day, it's got to be Woody Guthrie.
Right.
And I'm really lucky that in 1990, I met Harold Liebenthal, who managed Woody, He signed Bob Dylan in 1963 to CBS Records, and I spent an afternoon in his office, and I performed a poem HIV, which later on, I told you about with Trevor. And the words that he gave to me that afternoon was the encouragement that's kept me going forever. And he said to me, if Woody had been alive, you certainly are in the spirit of what Woody Guthrie was. And so my ultimate hero is Woody Guthrie.
That's amazing. So, like, just some of the comments that you've had for it, like the Ian Jury one, and then obviously that Woody Guthrie one. I mean, if they were the last things that people said about you, you could die happy, couldn't you?
Yeah, I love Jury. I really did love Ian, and to be called the Ian Jury of the 21st century is probably the greatest compliment anybody's ever said to me. And I treasure that. And I hope that I never take it lightly. That. And if we've got a little bit more space for one little story, I'll tell you a little story.
Mm-hmm.
So, during the period of Curbside, when we did Edinburgh, Jason Knight's mum and dad came up to Edinburgh to help us every day. At the end of the festival, I said to Ricky, what can I do to say thank you to you? He said, Ian, I would love you to come. At that time, he was teaching down in North Devon. He said, I'd love you to come down to my school and talk to the kids. And I'd done my book at that time, Nothing to Lose. And so I had this idea. We went down to Devon, we went into a few schools. And so what I got the band did a music workshop with the kids. And I did the English. I always said the lunatic took over the asylum. The only condition I made was you didn't stop me doing whatever I wanted to do. So I talked to these kids, and then word got around, and the Times Educational Supplement did a big thing on me. You can find the article online. It's called "Nicking Cars Isn't Cool," and it talks about me doing school up here in Surrey. Now, the only teacher that I had at school that was one I respected, was a guy called Danny Maloney. Now, he saw the article in the TES, and that time he was the headmaster of another school, and he'd written to me. Now, unbeknownst to me, I never opened the letter. In 2016, I was clearing out lots of things, and there was this letter addressed to me, and I opened it, and I read this letter, and I had the most deepest of shame. I was like, wow. Now, Danny had given me a book. When I first started writing poetry, I went back to school, and he gave me this book on the war poets, because I've written this poem called Flanders. So I phoned up. Now, Danny's now the chief executive of 10 academies, so it was a bit easier to find him. So I phoned him up and spoke to his secretary, and he wasn't there. And so a couple of hours later, phone rings, it's Danny. He went, Willsey. I went, Danny, I'm so sorry, mate. He said, before you say anything else, he said, I've been dining out on you for 45 years. So his secretary said to Danny also, he said, is that from Wills and the Willing? He said, yes. He said, I love his stuff. Like, what's the odds of that, right? So Danny and I agreed to have lunch. And we go and have lunch. It was amazing to see him. And he's in his 70s. And he recounts these stories of what he'd been dining out on me for the last 45 years. Now, separately in an event that happened, when I did my book in 2005 for the Fringe, I self-published. And then Alex, who I did the book with, I wrote a song. If you go on my SoundCloud, you'll sort of see a song called Spiky John, which I wrote about Sid Vicious. And I sent Alex the lyrics, and Alex asked me if he could share the lyrics with two people. And I said, of course you can. And one of the lyrics that he shared was a lady called Teddy, and she actually was Sid's girlfriend. And she asked me a question. She asked Alex to ask me a question, which I answered back. One of the lines was that you shot H like a gun and took the love of your life. So she was asking, am I saying that Nancy was his love of his life? And I said, no, I felt that the love of Sid's life was life itself, but he didn't know how to love it. So she said, she published my book. So in the process of publishing my book, something that I'd written 11 years earlier, I asked, do you mind if I added I thought about the streets of San Francisco. And so I thought, do you mind if I add an epilogue? Because I was not the person writing that book in 2005 to 2016, 11 years had passed in my life. 2008 had happened, the Arab Spring, all these other things that happened in our lives. And I had changed. And so I decided to write an epilogue. And then Danny recounts these two stories. So I said to Danny, would you mind writing those two stories and being the final pages in my book? And he wrote them verbatim. And if you want to give me an email saying, and I'll send you the book, because you'll love the two stories of the Ian Wills of 15 years old. And then everything that's in this podcast, you will see is actually, I probably haven't told the whole story.
Yeah.
But you.
Yeah, definitely, man. I'd love to see all that as well. As I say, man, it's a fantastic life. I can't believe you've not been on any other podcasts, because there'd be some cracking ones that I'd have some in mind that would be ideal for you to tell your story.
Well, like everything else, I think that the in the first albums, podcasts weren't really in vogue. London Country sort of got lost and killed because of COVID. Another Long Week's coming out, and it gives people a reason to talk to me. And
Yeah.
I'm always honest in my sort of things that we talk about. And I hope that people who listen to this get something out of it.
It has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you over the course of a couple of sessions. I wish you all the best with the new album, which Another Long Week, which comes out 5th of June.
5th of July.
5th of July. So 5th of July. So you get the two gigs beforehand.
The album's out
London St Pancras on the 19th of June. And Isle of Wight on the 22nd of June.
Yeah.
And then this album out the 5th of July.
Yeah, and I'm going to release First Violin on the 21st of June.
Right. That's the next single.
Yeah.
And
then the album will come out. And Martin, thank you for having me as a guest. It's been amazing, mate.
I hope you all enjoyed this episode of Time for Heroes podcast. If you would like to get in touch, the best way is on the Facebook page, Time for Heroes Podcast, or on Instagram at Time for Heroes Podcast, or Twitter at Time for Heroes P1, or drop me an email at timeforheroespod@gmail.com. You'll find Time for Heroes on all podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple, Google, and Amazon. Please leave a review where you can, share with others, and more importantly, enjoy.